there's a New York Times article that the headline is, and this was before he was acquitted, it says, Penny trial defense shifts focus from choke to sickle cell and drug use. You might be wondering, I'm sorry, what? Basically, Penny's attorneys told the jury he did not touch anyone. This is the courtroom, like, proceedings. So this is like things that actually, like, this is not me just saying
right. And some of this is agreed upon by both the prosecution and the defense, that he didn't touch anyone, that he didn't have a weapon. These things are agreed upon.
The other point that was made by the prosecutor was that Penny could have easily restrained Neely without choking him to death. And I did check with veteran friends of mine, including a former Marine who obviously would be trained in the same kind of, chokeholds and things like that. These are things that you're supposed to do to disarm someone, to neutralize them, not to kill them, and that a Marine should know the difference. And that if you look at the video, this is what my friend was telling me. If you look at the video, it's quite clear that there are several people that are around him that say, like, hey, I've got his hands, you can let go. And at no point does he let go.
And this part is agreed upon again by both prosecution and defense, is that he got on the train. He was, clearly not well. And within 30 seconds, so it's not like this went on for minutes and minutes. Within 30 seconds, Penny had Neely in a chokehold. This from The Guardian, called a blood choke that Penny's own Marine trainer testified was used improperly by the ex-Marine. Improperly meaning way too long. The specific chokehold will render a person unconscious in 13 seconds. The Marine Corps martial arts instructor testified, at which point you're supposed to stop. Penny held Neely in the chokehold for 6 minutes and at least 50 seconds while Neely was completely limp. 50. So way over what is needed to kill someone.
There is, I feel personally, like a disturbing amount of people that are on Penny's side in this and feel that he should have been acquitted, when it seems pretty clear to me that this was murder, like hands-on murder, right? And here's the thing. I'm not discounting that Penny or other people on the train might have felt threatened. I'm sure that, especially as a Marine, if he'd seen combat, I'm sure that whatever happened was probably incredibly triggering for him. I'm not discounting any of that. And also does not give you the right to murder someone. We can hold multiple truths at the same time. And I feel like a lot of people are losing that second truth, that, like, maybe because you felt threatened on a subway train, so have I, or things like that. Like, you're losing that second truth, which is, it doesn't give you the right to murder someone. And I'm assuming, since you're here and hanging out with us, you have not murdered someone when you felt threatened on the subway, because there's a part of you that's like, that's a thing you don't do.
And all the evidence is that this guy knew what this chokehold is capable of. And also there is something called unintentional manslaughter, which he also was acquitted of. So he didn't even have to know. But
yeah, absolutely. So. And the other point that the prosecutor mentioned was, there is something else that is glaringly missing from his statement: any regret, any remorse, any self-reflection. He never expresses any sorrow about the man's death. So in her closing argument, she refers to she plays video of Penny twice referring to Neely as a crackhead in an interview with police, and telling jurors that he never asked about Neely's conditions. Now, I don't know about you, but even when I've gotten into like scuffs, like in, like when I lived in LA and got into like scuffs, and I just punched at the person, and I'm not any kind of belt. I have no belt. Okay. I am beltless. This was like nothing like elegant about my fighting back.
I am beltless.
There was nothing elegant about me fighting back. Okay. So it was just like this wild shit that happened. I still turned around to see, is the person like running away? Are they okay? I didn't like magically hit some pressure point and they're not moving, right? I was immediately like, this person attacked me, but are you okay? Like, and I'm not saying everybody is as empathetic in that moment, but it's like, if you held someone in a chokehold and they went limp, where is the part of you that's like, holy shit, man, are you okay? Or like, what there, I feel like there has to be a part of you that's like, oh man, I need to make sure that person isn't dead. But there was none of that. There was none of that from him. And so this is not, again, like, this is not the point here. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have any bearing on whether he's guilty or not, but it does speak to the way his mind works, right? And the way that he approached it, right? The way that he approached this situation as somebody who would not show any remorse is, to me, very telling.
To go to his defense, they shifted to they shifted it to like, oh, he had sickle cell, Jordan Neely, and therefore it doesn't count as murder because it was the sickle cell that killed him, which is a long-time racist defense and talking point. This is not a new thing in America's history, as saying, oh, and by the way, sickle cell is predominantly African-American issue. 90% of all full-blown sickle cell is in African-Americans. And so this is not the first time that this has been used, like, oh, basically their own body, their own cells killed them. It wasn't the fact that I was choking them to death. And sure enough, they got this quack, Dr. Satish Chundru. They paid him nearly $100,000 to testify at the trial that it was the sickle cell that killed
Well, so
Neely.
he said that Neely died from a combination of schizophrenia, which I don't know how you can die from schizophrenia, synthetic marijuana, sickle cell trait, and the struggle from being in Penny's restraint. The struggle.
Right.
So again, it's his fault for struggling, I guess, right?
Not lack of oxygen.
He did not say chokehold. He said struggle. So like, I guess if he would have just laid there and died quietly, then it wouldn't, This is really, really disturbing because it is once again suggesting that like he could have died anyway. So like, it's really not Daniel Penny's fault, because look at all these problems. He had synthetic marijuana in his system. He was schizophrenic. He had sickle cell. So, I mean, you could have touched him and he would have like just fallen apart and died right there. It is a very like pro-eugenics, racist, and patently untrue suggestion by the defense.
Yeah, and the Guardian article says there's no good scientific evidence that a sickle cell trait plays any role in choking deaths.
Well, right, and the doctor who performed the autopsy, Dr. Cynthia Harris, told the jurors that there are no alternative reasonable explanations for his death besides the choke, and that those proposed by the defense were, quote, so improbable that it stands shoulder to shoulder with impossibility, which is just really like a fancy way of saying it's just fucking wrong.
Not true, yeah.
But like the fact that I don't know, of course, I can't know the minds of the jurors, but like the fact that this kind of pseudoscience eugenics BS played a role in getting him acquitted is deeply disturbing because it could set that precedent that like, the other people, especially if Black, that end up being victims of this kind of violence, that could find themselves victims again of this kind of eugenic pseudoscience BS in court and have their murderers acquitted on those grounds.
Right. It sets a precedent. It codifies the idea that, oh, well, Black people specifically, because, they're pointing to largely Black traits and they're saying, oh, well, Black people can't actually die from hands other than their own. He killed himself via his own cells. But yeah, and there's another one. This is interesting in the Guardian article, long-term thing. This is blaming sickle cell, but another one has been excited delirium, has been another diagnosis.
Sounds like hysteria.
It does. Classification of mental disorders by mental health professionals in the U.S. used to often explain how someone died in police custody was excited delirium. And so he says in the article, what findings of excited delirium and sickle cell trait both do is pathologize Black people, especially Black men, by turning their own bodies against them in the court of law. Penny's lawyers, as Gothamist reported, argued that Neely's own cells starved him of oxygen, not their client's arm wrapped around his neck.
Yeah, it's his cell's fault.
Also, I was pretty shocked to find out that they tried this same defense with Derek Chauvin, who killed George Floyd, right? In 2021, the lawyers had said the same thing, that the sickle cell trait is what killed George Floyd, not the kneeling on his neck for 8 minutes. And it didn't work that time. So Chauvin got convicted, but it worked this time.
It's this like really racist and disgusting contradiction. It's like, well, we have to be afraid of Black men because they're big and they're strong and they'll kill you. But at the same time, their bodies are so weak that their bodies just kill themselves. It's not the white person's fault. Well, you have to pick one. It can't be both. You know, it's kind of like Schrodinger's immigrant. They can't be really lazy and just taking all of taking all of the jobs at the same time. Like pick a lane.
They're super lazy, but they do some of the hardest backbreaking work in the farms.
And taking all of the jobs
on the farms. Like, so
it's like either you have to pick the racist trope of like these Black men are big and scary and they're gonna kill you as soon as they look at you, or they're weak and their bodies are gonna kill them for you. It's like you can't do both at the same time.
And there's an underlying idea of he was more threatening to these people on the train, really because Black people are a little more threatening. Now, that doesn't mean that goes for all of them, and I assume many people on this train were not white, but it is this underlying idea of like an unhinged or mentally ill Black person is more threatening. And, you know, speaking to that point, I have a friend who I care about very much who's had some mental issues and mental breaks. And because he's a white guy, the cops came and several times they did have to arrest him when it really got bad. But they didn't shoot at him. They didn't people were far more willing to like put up with a certain level of, kind of unhinged, angry ranting and stuff, because this is a, small white guy as opposed to someone else. And it very well may have saved his life on some occasions.
Yeah, I don't know that he'd still be with us if he were Black, to be honest.
Because
the amount of times that he's interacted with the cops when he's been very, very unwell.
So a lot of these aspects of like the eugenics argument and stuff is kind of not really being discussed for all the right-wingers celebrating this. I know there's some people who claim not to be right-wing celebrating this as well, which is sad. This is being hugely celebrated by like J.D. Vance and I assume Trump as well as like this wonderful vigilante moment. Mm-hmm. And that's not what this is.
Well, and of course, like there's also underlying, kind of like your thing, Lee, with the layers. There's a lot of layers of things that we're not talking about here. Jordan had mental health issues. He was also, as he stated, hungry. He needed support that our system purposefully keeps from people, particularly if they have mental health problems and are Black. So if he had gotten the care that he needed, he wouldn't even have been on the train, quote unquote, bothering or threatening or however people are phrasing it. He would have been getting the care that he needed. He might have been eating lunch somewhere. Like, who knows? Like the fact that our system continuously keeps healthcare from people and keeps basic needs like food and shelter from people is going to perpetuate a lot of more situations where people feel threatened. I mean, the times that I have felt threatened, in places like LA have oftentimes been from people who are unhoused and dealing with mental health issues. Now, that I understand exactly where that comes from. And I think that it's disgusting that our system perpetuates that kind of lived experience for people. And it's going to be an experience for people who, like a lot more people are going to be unhoused, and a lot more people are going to be interacting with people who have mental health issues, whether they're unhoused or not, people who are dealing with PTSD, people who are dealing with extreme hunger. Yep. This is going to be a thing that keeps happening. So how are we going to deal with it collectively? And I think that that's the other thing that I think is really important for people who are like, oh, I don't know really like which side I'm coming down on. If you were that person, because as we've talked about on this show before, you and I and everyone else in this country are 1 or 2, maybe 3, if you're like a trust fund kid or something, 3 emergencies away from being unhoused or being, in a similar situation. How would you want someone to deal with you if you were having a break because of the extreme pressures of this falling empire? How would you want someone to deal with you? And I think that is like the question that doesn't get asked enough either, is like, oh, well, if this is something that's going to keep happening, are we just going to accept that people get to be murdered on subway cars because they threw their jacket? Is that like the kind of civilization that we want to live in.